감 따윈 넌 날 막지 못해 baby 좌로 담음하다 우로 담음하다 왠지도 신나 내 못난 엉속에 yeah yeah 나만의 바다를 그려 아주 둥근 비밀 공간이 돼 I'm waiting for ya 왔다 갔다 뒹굴거릴 때 난 커다란 세상을 다 가진 느낌 너도 눌러올래 몰래 눌러올래 정말 짜릿할 거야 내 못난 엉속에 yeah yeah 나만의 바다를 그려 아주 즐거운 비밀 공간이 돼 I'm waiting for ya I'm waiting for ya
Good evening, and welcome back to TIS-100, where I'm trying to find the mode of a sequence, as I recall, and was going, that looks difficult, which was thus why I stopped, because it looked like this was going to probably require me to actually do the whole thing in one sitting rather than leaving myself a half-finished program to go, what the hell, there's nothing I can usefully do with that. What we need to do is to accumulate somehow a histogram, probably in these stack memory nodes, of incoming values. And one possible approach to that involves filling the stack memory node with zeros, and then for each incoming number copying enough numbers across from one stack memory node to the other, then incrementing the number that corresponds with the number we just read in, and then copying everything back again. And I think that should work. The only tricky thing is that we thus need some slightly odd signalling mechanism at startup to say this stack memory node contains the right things. So we could have a really crude thing of just having this node here. No, actually we can just copy zeros in from the start, can't we? I mean, this probably actually wants to use the accumulator, doesn't it? But it'd be faster not to. Let's halt it in a low power state rather than going into a tight loop. And obviously, actually, it wants to go do something to signal up to the others that things are ready. So the idea here is that -1, when pushed onto this stack memory node, indicates you have finished copying things back. And so this one then knows when to terminate that without needing to count it. So then this does something like wait for, that's not spelled correctly, more right up. So wait for that node to be ready, for the stack memory to be set up, and then loop I mean, that's not complete yet, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, it doesn't. What does that get wrong then? It starts all right. Correctly updates that. So that's all correct. Oh, right, T is in the wrong place because actually that wants to be jumped to M. T is only for when we reach the very end of a sequence, and we're going to need some more signalling for that anyway. Right, so actually let's do that a bit more carefully. So we'll let this run until it actually reads that 0 from the input, and then see if the histogram looks good. Right, so this is after it's just processed the first input sequence, the 253515, and we have a 1, 2, a 3, and 3 5s, which is correct. So at that point we need something to evaluate this histogram and work out what the output is. Which is at least a slightly inconvenient operation, isn't it? And like, we can't really do that in the 4 lines we've got left here, surely. So possibly either this node copies the current contents of the histogram downwards, and this one does the evaluation, or it sends a signal that causes this one, which is conveniently connected directly to the stack memory node, to do the evaluation. And actually this makes me think we do need to push a sentinel value at the other end of the stack, because its purpose will be to tell us that we've read off the entire contents and can now emit the maximum if we happen to know the maximum. If there happens to be a maximum. So this is quite complicated, so I feel we want to have a node essentially dedicated to the evaluation job. So here is the point at which we need to say, oh, we've reached the end of the sequence. And in that case, we essentially send an arbitrary signal downwards and then go back to the top of the list. Indeed, actually, no, this is the two-step thing, because this processor needs to signal you should now evaluate, and then it needs to wait for a signal saying evaluation done, we've zeroed the histogram again, you can start processing the next sequence. So then here we wait for that signal, and then we need somehow have we got enough space that we could actually have this just copy the histogram downwards? So let's initialize our thing with a -1 at the top of the stack as well as at the bottom, and then we could make this go there's a slight problem that we need this. I suppose we can add an extra instruction that's a bit expensive. Indeed, it's kind of critically expensive because that uses up our that burns one instruction that we don't. If we could fit one more instruction in here, we could put in a J. Oh gods, we really want it to be a JGE greater than or equal to 0, and we don't have one of those. So that means that we don't really have enough space here to read out the histogram. So we're going to simply have to get someone else to do that job. So now, when we finish processing something, a signal goes that way, and the second half of this processor is then reading out the contents of the stack and copying it over to this one. We can demonstrate that by having a trivial loop here that copies it out. Let's just test that that works. It does not. going on here then? You're, as I expect, waiting for that signal. You're what are you doing moving from right, you weird thing? What's that line doing there at all? Oh, that was my stop, wasn't it? Yes. Yes, my deliberate deadlock this processor so it doesn't do anything. Right, that's all looking reasonable. So now we actually have to evaluate this histogram. So what we need is to count where we are in the histogram, i.e. what the current thing input value we're looking at is, and keep track of the current maximum input value and what the current maximum count and what input value it was received from. So we need 3 numbers that we think about it. So that means we can't do this in a single processor. So now just thinking about what the right split is. Like, do we do this in 3 processors or do we do it in 2 using back in 1 processor? So we're going to need to be able to do comparisons. So that tends to suggest, I feel, that we want a processor whose job it is to know our current total, and indeed, yes, so I think we have one processor whose job it is to know the best value we've seen so far, and it uses back to, well, actually to back that up, so that when it damages it doing a comparison, it can restore it. And then we have another processor whose job it is to count where we are in the sequence, and and its back records what the best where in the sequence we saw the best value. Right. So so then we end up with something like we want something like a JRO and then the 2 options being SAV and, well, don't SAV really. And then add 1 jump L. I mean, that doesn't quite work because we need to also find the end of the sequence, which means we need to detect a -1. I'm now wondering if we can do better than using -1 in some way by having a sentinel that will have some surprising effect when we subtract it, but I don't think that's achievable. So then this one does something along the lines of okay, we're going to need to be cleverer than this, aren't we? because how do we, if it turns out that the thing we've subtracted is greater than what we had in the accumulator, then we somehow need to get the thing that we just subtracted and stick it in the accumulator. And that's not going to work. And we can't use this one's accumulator to save that value. So we could, of course, use this one's accumulator to save it. As in, this could send 2 copies, which then this would pass on, and this one would then use those 2 copies appropriately. The alternative is this processor takes on a kind of controlling role, and this one's accumulator is used to keep track of where in the list we are. So essentially this one says to this one, we have just advanced in the list and please record the current value in back and please record 0 in back. Oh gods, but we can't do that because that corrupts the accumulator. The requirement to write a 0 if we have a tie has the awkward feature that that's not just saving the current position in the list. And that means that, and we can only, if we're using back to store our current winner, then that can't be, so the current winner has to be stored in this lower processor, and it can't be the one that's also doing the counting. So in particular, that sav actually becomes mov ac down. I think possibly preceded by a what this thing is, so that we could have JRO up here. So then we still need that getting a spare copy of the current value. What does that do? What do I not accomplish? What have I not done yet in that? What do you mean mov 1 down, you weirdo? Mov 1 right. Oh yes, and I know how to write breakpoints at the moment, don't I? It involves putting an exclamation mark somewhere. Hooray. I should have put the exclamation mark. Oh, well, I'm going to single step this anyway. So we have an off by one error there. And now we're just reading all the zeros in, and no more joy ensues. But we have found 4, which is the correct answer, except that the correct answer is 5. And that's simply a problem because we start with the accumulator being 0, and it turns out we actually need to start the accumulator at 1. Because our histograms run from 1 and not from 0. So that would fix that. Then we need a sensible mechanism for detecting we've reached the end of the list. Now, it occurs to me that there we do discard the value we just read from the right, and actually the contents, this is where we are if the new value is smaller than the best we've seen. -1, the list terminator, will always be smaller, and we have a spare copy of that value. So if we were to, and we have a spare register because we're just about to restore ACK. So we could actually go here. We have now reached the end of the list. Here is what we do when we reach the end of the list. What we do is we signal to the right a new operation. And that new operation is mostly actually to signal downwards, but probably also then to tidy things up a bit. Well, yeah, I mean, no, actually, let's leave the numbers being wrong for now, and then we can fix the numbers up in a moment. So in the case where we have an answer, it will be in ACK, so we just need to go mov ACK down. And that's basically it. So those are actually 2 becomes 1 and 1 becomes 3. Making the most common thing the thing at the end so that it gets the jump back to the start for free. Then this one does need to do a bit of processing to reset everything. In particular, this stack memory node should then be empty, so that's good. And that's fine. This will then start refilling at that moment, at that point. So this, actually maybe this does just need to go back up to the top because that will reset ACK. This one actually needs to do the most resetting because it needs to make sure that AC is 0 again. Right. I've still got that, check that breakpoint. How brave are we feeling? We're feeling quite brave today. If it gets 2 of them right. Actually, this is not going to work because because we haven't put in any special handling for cases where where we have a tie. So we'll output the wrong value in the case of a tie. Let's just prove that by waiting until we get to one. So this should give us the wrong answer. Yes. Right. That's broken in precisely the ways we expected it to be. So the issue here is that after that sub right, we need a JEZ state. Lovely. I've got one instruction left to implement that. That's particular irritation because it's definitely going to be more complicated than that. Is it? So at the moment what we do in that case is we send, so yeah, we do various restoration things, and we, thank you Jacob, I'll put tie emoji in case of a tie. So like yes, equal to 0 is what we're going to be, is the circumstance under which we want to do something, and the something we want to do ends up being to write a 0 downwards into here, which we have a perfectly sensible mechanism for doing. It's essentially a mov 0, mov 3 down, mov 0 down here, which we've got plenty of space for. So we change that to a 7, and then our only problem is that we don't have any space to actually send that signal, because we have to we need to not only mov 5 right but also mov right nil. And that's 2 instructions plus the jump to tidy up at the end, which is more than we have space for. So Is there some way that I can fit that in here somehow? So, I mean, we're going to need we're going to need those two conditionals, and we're going to need then the various mechanisms for looping back to the start. This one never even sees the flag, the sentinel value. Just going, can I somehow merge this with the Z case? But we ultimately absolutely need MOV 5 right, and that's the only instruction we've got space for. Also, don't we kind of need to do something after that MOV thing down? Yes. Because that one was okay falling through, but this one needs to do something different. There we go. Right. At the point where your comparison delivers 0, ACK already contains 0. Yes. Don't think that helps us, because when we end up here it contains -1, which is good enough with one weird exception. If we have -1 in the accumulator at the start of the loop, then that's actually quite acceptable too, and that will give us the correct answer in more cases. So we can do that. So that's a start. It's sadly not quite good enough because we still need to dispose of the incoming value, but we could do that by jumping to there, which would be perfectly safe. I have no idea what to call this label. Let's call it P for no good reason. No, not that one. Okay, how about that? That didn't work. Moreover, we've ended up at that location when we really shouldn't have. Oh no, of course, because all those zeros are going to count as ties, right? That's fine. Why did we end up at that zero? At that, we end up jamming there. Let's stick in a breakpoint at the obvious halfway stage. Right, so we read in a 1. And that does the obvious thing. We then get in another one, and of course that's a tie. This happens in the wrong order. Okay. Because we actually need to... we need to read off the second value before that JRO happens. However, no, we've only got one spare instruction over here now. Yes, so the problem is that the N case, for instance, does MOV right ACK, MOV 1 right. Similarly here, this does MOV right ACK, blah, 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 MOV 3 right. So it's no good us doing MOV 5 right and then the other thing. And similarly, if we want to swap those over here, we're kind of foiled by the fact that that would then mean that this MOV right left has to happen probably not in every one of these cases. It only has to happen in 2 of them, actually. And conveniently, that only costs us 1 more instruction. So, if we instead put that in the 2 cases where it's needed... for completely different reasons, it turns out to be needed, but... And then we obviously need to move these MOVs upwards. That might work. Let's see. That's not right. What went wrong there? Oh, there's a fall through there that I'd not realised happened. And we're kind of, oh dear, yes. That's fine. Nothing actually cares about that instruction. See, there should have been a great big fall through comment there. Well, 5 is now completely the wrong number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is now the new 5, and 9 is the new 7. Undefined label, oh yes. earth is that for? I mean, I said 6 was the new 5, but that's blatantly the wrong place to jump to now. So that's when we've just signalled a reset of the... Well, let's assume L is where we want to go back to and then see what it is that we're failing to do. No, obviously we need to jump back to hit that add 1, don't we? So that's all behaving itself. Now there's the point where we have our first tie. That drops through to there, signals that. Looks good. Okay. There seems to be a slight problem that we never signal that we've reached the end. Because by now, surely we should have output that first result. And we haven't, plus it's wrong. Why is it 7? It goes 1, 0, 3, 7. 7? Have I got a mistaken fall through somewhere? Don't think so. Right, so let's take this fairly slowly. So first we process the initial 1, which says that 1 is currently winning. Fine. Then we process the 1 in the 2 slot. And that says that 0 is currently winning. So then we're looking at the 3 slot, which also has a 1 in it. Oh, I'm missing a swoop, aren't I? I mean, I don't know if this is relevant, but it's obviously a bug, so we should make sure that we restore the value, the best we've seen so far in the case where we've just matched it. Right, let's try that. And what? Oh, yes, there we are. Right. So our first best is 1. Then we catch a tie. Which means that our best is now 0, and we've remembered that that our best position is 0, and we remember that the best value we've seen is still 1. Still 0, best we've seen is still 1. Then we get a 0. Oh no, have we got another 1? That was wrong, I think. Right, what happened there? Because we still haven't read that 0. Oh, because of course this one's always sending a second copy to the left. But in the case where we jump to 6, we don't use that. So we need an additional mov right nil here. Right, so our best is 1. Then our best is 0 because we've got a tie. Then now my 9 label needs to be 10. Thank you, Simon. If only we could have symbolic labels that we could transport between processors. Right. So our best is 1 at 1. Our best is 1 at is 1 at a tie. Best is still 1 at a tie. Our best is 3 at 5. Well, that's kind of correct. But it still didn't actually output anything. So that's... And it looked like that was because... this one did something wrong. Did it? But surely we've hit 10 there. That still sat at mov 10 right. So even though this is at mov right left, which suggests that mov 10 right didn't quite byte correctly. Let's stick a breakpoint there then and see what state we're in when we hit that instruction. So that looks like we've just... So we've ended up here. which is somewhere we should end up shortly after reading something. Have we got a fall through? I'm not on this side. No, there's an unconditional jump bus just before it. The only way we can get here is from there. And that looks like a pretty good place to get there. But that now happens after that MOV3 write, which is a problem. Right, yes. So that MOV... So our problem now is that because I carefully reordered things so that we didn't have to send data to... So that we only sent the second copy across to this processor when it actually needed it, because I needed to do that for some other ordering purpose. We now actually end up saying what we want the middle processor to do before we really know what we want the middle processor to do. Because, yes, because the thing was, otherwise this one ended up having to do too much processing of data from the right. But the problem is that now it doesn't actually know what it wants to send to the right early enough. And so it sends a 3 even when it turns out that it didn't really want to send a 3. Because actually we'd found the end of the list. And what it's then going to do is to go back up to the top of the loop and try to read the next item from the list. But there are no next items on the list. So that's no good at all. What it wants to do... So that means that... that means that we're stuck. The problem is that we have to do that MOV from the right before we can tell the thing on the right what to do, because the centre processor what to do, because before that we won't know whether we've reached the end of the list or not. Though maybe... but the thing is, we haven't got enough space. We haven't got enough space to move to like, one possibility is we stage the value via the accumulator in the centre processor, and then the centre processor can work out whether it's reached the end of the list without bothering to ask the left one. But the thing is that requires an extra instruction to stage it into the accumulator. So that MOV right left would have to become a MOV right ACK do something MOV ACK left, because this one also needs to know where we are. So I don't really like that. So we can save an instruction here by jumping up to here at the expense of this one then having to discard a value in the tie case, which otherwise we didn't need. So yes, I don't think I can safely sleep at this point because I won't be able to remember what's going on here unless I decide that this is totally wrong-headed because I can't find enough instructions. So if we were to do this differently, how would we do it? Like, if we were to make this node somehow more of a coordinator, could we push the counting down into this one? Not easily, no. There was that problem that we had before, that the counting has to be done in this node. I'm just going to go, this is slightly sneaky, but standard, most common node count for this job is 7. Which is using all the nodes. Managing to do it in 5 would be impressive. Okay, that's an interesting fact to know. But on the other hand, we are infuriatingly close to getting this to go. I mean, like, actually we can save some instructions by, for instance, adding and when I say save some instructions, of course, I mean save some instructions in this processor at the expense of adding extra ones in this processor. Sorry, vice versa. But that's actually what we want to do because, like, we've got plenty of space down here. Anything we can do to take load off this one is obviously sensible. To the extent that I'm now wondering if we can do some kind of encoding whereby we send a single value down to indicate various things, and this one does a lot of hard work decoding to reduce the number of MOVs up here. My 10 is now a 9, of course. So, does this help me? Not really, because my problem is actually on this side, that it's actually with the structure of the whole thing I've set up, but the major problem is that if I do that, so my problem is if I do that second MOV right left before the JRO left, then every case on this side has to read from right, and the issue is that that's expensive, because they have to do them before they MOV something to the right, and that means they all have to have a separate operation to read and dispose of the thing that comes in from the right, which is seriously inconvenient unless I can be clever. Maybe I can. So let's see. Because while we have 3-ish cases here, maybe we can organise them to diverge late enough. But the problem is that in that case they'd have to diverge. So if we go back to the idea that we MOV right left before the JRO left, so 6 becomes 5 and 9 becomes 8. And that means we remove that MOV right nil, so 8 becomes 7. So then, over here, what are the things that we might use right for? Mostly, we either move it into the accumulator or we throw it away. So, under what circumstances do we... And if we... And the problem is, if we move it into the accumulator, then we've corrupted the accumulator and we can't use we can't then do any conditions after that. So that means that we need to do that. The first condition we test should be the one that says, are we going to need the value from the right? And the circumstances under which we need the value from the right are here. So what we want is, which is the GZ case, and we want that to be the one that we check first. So we want to make this JGZP, then mov right nil. And then then we need another conditional jump, which we don't have room for. We've got another mov right ack there. What's that doing? I think I need to write slightly more of this. I need to go through this a little more carefully, possibly even just wiping out the existing code and rewriting it more sensibly, because there's not very much complexity here. This processor, I can remember how it works. So this down here should be the case of hang on. No, why am I doing this? So that's not right at all. I'm going to completely rewrite this processor and see if I can get it right this time. So, the circumstances under which we need a second copy are when we have subtracted it and oh no, this doesn't work at all. Well, maybe, oh gods. No, this is all backwards. This isn't going to work. Because there are two circumstances under which we need a second copy. Let me just write the various cases and then I'll stick the jumps in later. So, if the result is greater than 0, then we need to then that means that our new thing we're comparing is less than the current winner, and therefore life is extremely boring. And we just have to signal less than the current winner and go back to the top of the loop. If the result is less than 0, except that that's more complicated, but we'll get back to that in a moment. If the result is less than 0, then we have a new winner, and so we want to signal 1 to the right, which actually in the current arrangement And of course that means that this one needs a throwing away, though it could corrupt ACK if it preferred. This of course needs to restore ACK, so we also need a swoop, which can come later, which might be useful because it can then be shared. So that's fine, except that it doesn't have the end of sequence handling. And the inconvenient thing about the end of sequence handling is that it appears in the greater than 0 case. Which is kind of annoying because it otherwise looks like the equal to 0 case. So the thing is, the equal to 0 case, I was kind of thinking you can obviously combine those MOV-right nils and they don't corrupt the accumulator, except that actually the greater than or 0 case, we want to inspect that. So we end up having to do MOV-right ACK. And then going to the special end of sequence processing. And we've now only got 2 instructions for the 2 comparisons we need and the end of sequence processing, and obviously that doesn't work. So then the obvious question is, can we get the end of sequence processing to work differently so that it doesn't have to fall into the greater than or 0 case, which is a bad one to be in? Can we instead somehow put it into the less than 0 case, so that would require that the end of sequence be marked with, say, 999, which would be guaranteed to be bigger than anything. So then our slight problem is that we depend here on that's not going to be too hard to fix though, is it? On it being -1, but we can easily change it there. We can do like sub 998 JGZ, or indeed sub 999 JEZ. So if we do that, and then that means our sentinel is now 999, which then means that it falls into the LZ case here. So then what we want to do is that mov right nil does have to, that mov right nil can then be pulled out above the GZ label. And the EZ label can change that to jump R. And then we put in the JEZ here. Then LZ here, getting there, but it still doesn't fit. Now our problem is that we need to say, is the new value we've got 999? There, which we can't sensibly do in one instruction. Because previously we had the advantage that our sentinel value was the only negative number we could ever see here, but sadly now it isn't. Sadly now our sentinel value is 999, which is one of many positive values we can see here. And while in two instructions we can test if what we've got is really 999, that's also not very helpful because we haven't got enough space for two instructions here. Our whole problem was that we didn't have any space to do anything in. And we've got a spare mov right nil here. We can at least gain ourselves one more instruction. I'm now wondering if we can do more gratuitous fall-throughs somehow. Like, we could merge the GZ and EZ cases if the thing we ended up on over here disposed of the spare value that passed through. So we could go like that, and then when we mov 3 right, that jumps us to there, and then that consumes that 6, that mov consumes that 6, and then we can share that swap instruction. I mean, this is still obviously stupid, but maybe we can use that trick after we put everything back the way it used to be. So if we go back to -1, because -1 is something we can test for much, much more easily. No, actually, we don't want... Oh... Well, actually, let's carry on with this silly trick for now. The problem is we then have to add 999 again. Okay, this will work. It's horrific, but... And yes, there's a reason why I've written 9 there. Three becomes 4. 6 becomes 7. 8 becomes 9. I really don't believe this is going to work. Right, good. So now let's stick the standard breakpoint in and see why it didn't work. And then press the wrong button. So this one, oops, does what we expect. Oh, right. Oh. Well, I can't quite remember what this code is doing, but it looks like we actually have a spurious mov left nil there, because the fall through turns out to already have one. That now needs to become a 6 and an 8 again. That was weird. Wasn't expecting it to output something. I think our sequence of fall throughs here is falls through here is still wrong then. So that's correct. What? Why is that a jump 1? It should be a jump T. It should never have been a jump 1. So we successfully write, say, 1 at 1 is our winner. Then 1 tie is our winner. 1 tying is still our winner. Four should apparently be 3. A lot of tedious processing of zeros. And we successfully output the right number. Okay. Let's remove that breakpoint and let it run and see if it can get ties correct as well. Looks like it. Well, that's an extremely silly program. There is an interesting feature that the largest number we've seen in an input sequence so far is 5. Which makes me wonder if you just keep the number of 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s and 5s in the accumulators of 5 different processors. Now, our design at least is constrained solely by the capacity of your stack memory node. And of course the sequences are very short, so there are probably other silly approaches you could take. Here's my new other stupid approach. Read the sequence into a stack memory node and then repeatedly pass through the sequence, decrementing each number. When there is when none of the numbers left is positive, find the only 0 and write out its position, or write out 0 if there's more than one 0. That one allows for much larger values at the expense of fairly limited sequence length. Hang on, that was completely backwards. There was no way that's going to work. Sorry. That was actually a technique that you could use with this storage format. But a 5-node solution. 5-node solutions are pretty rare. Admittedly, most of the solutions are a lot faster than mine, but mine's also much more general than was required. Right, it's 21 minutes past midnight. I should stop there. I was right to put that one off until I could do an entire session on it. But, yes, well, that was a very tight fit in 5 nodes. But I'm quite pleased with it. So, yes, that'll be all for tonight. Good night.